Berko stood in the midst of the people, his voice, steady and rich with emotion, carried over the crowd like the winds of their ancestors' journeys. "The God of our ancestors," he began, his hands outstretched, palms upward as if holding the weight of their shared history, called Abram out from among his people. Because they worshipped idols, mere carvings of wood, lifeless and powerless, made by human hands. But our God, the living God, spoke to Abram, and Abram listened. The crowd murmured softly, drawn in by the weight of Berko's words. He paused, scanning their faces, seeking to anchor their attention. "Imagine it," he continued, his voice dropping to a reverent tone. "A man leaving behind his country, his kin, all he knew, simply because he trusted a promise. A promise that he would become a great nation. Abram, later called Abraham, took his wife, his nephew, and what little he could carry. He left everything for a land he had never seen because he believed." Berko's eyes gleamed with intensity as he surveyed the crowd, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his passion. He took a step forward, his sandals stirring the dust. "Abraham the Hebrew," he said with measured gravity, "had a son named Isaac. And Isaac had a son he named Jacob. And Jacob, do you know what happened to him?" He paused, letting the silence stretch before answering his own question. "Jacob wrestled with God himself. And after that night, his name was changed to Israel." The people leaned in, their curiosity palpable. "Israel," Berko repeated, his voice swelling, "the man who bore the promise. He had 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And their blood, your blood, carried the mark of the Creator. The one who formed Adam from the dust and breathed life into his being." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mothers clutched their children closer, fathers straightened their shoulders. They exchanged glances, whispered among themselves. Could it be? Could we truly be descended from a God so mighty, so near? "Do you think it's true?" one young man asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "That we are the descendants of Abraham? Of God himself?" Berko, with a confident, reassuring look on his face, replied to the young man, "Yes, we are." Berko stepped back, allowing his words to settle like dew on the hearts of his people. An elder woman, her face lined with the wisdom of many years, nodded solemnly. "If it is true," she said softly, "then we carry not only his promise but his purpose. We must live as though he watches, as though he calls us still." As the gathering dispersed, the hum of voices rose. Families walked home together, their conversations alive with wonder. And so, the night fell upon a people newly awakened to their heritage, a people stirred by the echo of an ancient promise, daring to believe they might still be part of something divine. The next morning, Adana felt rejuvenated as she reflects on the people's response to their message. She felt that the message was finally hitting home. A smile lit up her face. Her steps were lighter and she felt a song rose up in her heart, as she got closer to the well, a familiar path she often travels to fetch water. She thought she heard the ancestors singing with her. Adana gripped the rope tightly as she drew the bucket from the well, the water sloshing over the sides. The morning air was crisp and bright, yet the sudden unease she felt gave her chills. As she turned to pick up the bucket, a shadow stretched over her, a shadow too familiar to mistake. "Adana," a deep voice rumbled. Her heart thudded. Slowly she turned and there he was, Chief Okoro. His imposing frame towered over her, a sly grin plastered across his face. His eyes glinted with a mix of familiarity and menace. Adana swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Chief Okoro," she muttered under her breath, then grabbed the bucket and bolted before he could say another word. The water spilled, soaking her skirt, but she didn't care. Her only thought was to get away. Adana was happy to be back in the sanctity of her home. Berko's voice was heavy with worry as he spoke. "Adana, it's true. He's back." Adana sat on the stoop, still catching her breath. Berko sat beside her. "Chief Okoro," she whispered. "I saw him." Berko leaned forward, his tone dropping. "He wants his place back in Omatata." Berko said below his breath, "Evil always sticks around." Adana frowned in disbelief. "But how? He's a convicted criminal." Berko sighed. "He has friends in high places. The kind of friends who bend the rules like they're made of straw." As they made supper, Adana felt a surge of anger. "He's poison, Berko, the people's poison, and we all know it." Adana and Berko sat to eat, but they barely touched their supper. Their thoughts were far away. Later they tucked Berko Jr. in bed. When he finally fell asleep on Berko's chest, Berko prayed a prayer of protection over him, then stepped outside with Adana. Berko was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he added, "There's more. Senior father has returned as well." Adana's mouth fell open, words failing her. She stared at Berko, searching his face for any hint of exaggeration. Senior father, she finally managed. Wasn't he sent to prison for embezzlement? 2 wolves circling the same sheepfold? Umatada can't take this. Berko nodded grimly. Evil never sleeps. Both of them want control, confusing the people of Umatada. Adana clenched her fists. This isn't a fight for power. It's a fight for the soul of Umatada. Berko glanced at her, his eyes filled with a hint of hopelessness but quiet determination. And we're outnumbered, he added. Meanwhile in Aunt Nia's garden, the scent of herbs and damp soil filled the air as Chief Okoro approached Aunt Nia in her garden. She was bent over, weeding between rows of vegetables and herbs, but she straightened when she heard his heavy footsteps. Nia, Chief Okoro began, his tone as smooth as butter. I've come with an offer. I'm not selling, she said curtly, her eyes fixed on him like daggers. He raised his hands in mock surrender. Now, hear me out. I'll pay you generously, more than you've ever dreamed of. And you can keep working the garden for me. It's a win-win. My garden was grown for the healing of the people. Not to line your pockets. Aunt Nia's strong rebuke lingered in the air as if the ancestors were bearing witness to this moment. Chief Okoro's grin faltered. Be reasonable, Nia. Times are changing. The old ways are fading. Aunt Nia stepped closer, her voice rising with conviction. The old ways are what keep this land alive. And the gods of my ancestors will not let you trample their legacy. Her words hung in the air like thunder. Chief Okoro said nothing, his jaw tightening. Finally he turned and left, his steps heavier than when he arrived. One evening, Adana sat with Berko under the large baobab tree. The moon cast a pale glow over the village, but her heart felt heavy with shadows. How do we fight them, Berko? She asked, her voice trembling. They have money. They have power. And they have most of the people behind them. Berko stared at the ground, his hands clasped tightly. I don't know, Adana. I don't know. Just then Aunt Nia walked up. Hush, she said, her voice calm and steady but firm. Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Adana looked at her, puzzled. Our ancestors saw them in the heavens, Aunt Nia continued, her gaze fixed on the sky. When Elisha's servant doubted, God opened his eyes, and he saw the mountains filled with chariots of fire. The spirits of our ancestors stand with us. I too have seen them, Adana, Aunt Nia assured her. Her words sent a warmth through Adana. Slowly hope flickered in her chest. She turned to Berko, and in his eyes she saw a glimmer of the same hope and determination. Meanwhile in the heart of Umatada the division grows. Umatada was no longer the peaceful village it once was. The air was thick with tension like the moments before a storm. Neighbors avoided one another, whispers replaced greetings, and every glance carried suspicion. One plane, 2 wings, Berko muttered one evening as he and Adana watched the sun set. But how do we land without crashing? Adana took his hand, squeezing it tightly. We don't crash, Berko. We fight. For our people. For Umatada. As the days passed, Senior Father did not waste any time convincing some villagers to come back to the chapel, to the old ways of doing things. Soon, the reopened chapel was packed with villagers, drawn by Senior Father's fiery sermons and promises of redemption. Senior Father stood at the pulpit, his voice a commanding boom. No one dared ask him about the harm he has caused to the village? Or say to him, why should we trust you? Do not be swayed by whispers of doubt, he proclaimed. I am your senior leader, chosen by divine will to guide you. Do not touch God's anointed and do him no harm. Curses will come upon you. The congregation responded with shouts of amen and applause. Yet there were those who sat silently, their eyes clouded with mistrust. No one dared to ask him about the stolen money, but the unspoken question lingered in the air like smoke. After one particularly rousing service, Berko waited until the crowd dispersed, before stepping into the chapel. Senior Father stood at the altar, a smug smile on his face. What are your intentions toward the people of Umatada? Berko asked, his voice sharp. Have you not hurt them enough? Senior Father turned slowly, his smile vanishing. You are out of line, Berko, he said coldly. I am their senior leader. And as long as I have breath in me, I will always be their leader. You are taking advantage of these people and I won't let you, Berko shot back, his fists clenched. And how are you going to stop me? Do you think filling their heads with old wives' tales about ancestors and gods will help you? Senior Father and Berko locked eyes in defiance. Berko stepped closer, his eyes blazing with defiance. I won't stop you. But the God of our ancestors will. For a moment the two men stood inches apart, their eyes locked in a battle of wills. Then Berko lifted his hands and declared, his voice rising with authority, "No weapon that is formed against God's people shall prosper." Senior Father flinched, his expression flickering between anger and unease. Berko turned and left the chapel, his steps firm and unyielding. As Berko walked through the woods, he heard the ancestors whisper, "This battle is not yours but it is the Lord's." Berko then realized that this is a battle against good and evil. Hope and peace filled him inside. As Berko walked through the woods, the tension of the confrontation began to lift. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering a melody that seemed to call out to him. He paused, his breath catching as he heard the faintest of whispers. "This battle is not yours," the voices murmured. "It is the Lord's." A wave of peace and hope washed over him, filling every corner of his being. He closed his eyes, letting the voices guide his thoughts. A heaviness came over him as if he was in a deep sleep. He felt his heart burning as if fire was lit inside him. He was channeling the spirit of the ancestors' God. He gave way to the experience as he listened to the voice that rose up within him. "Speak to my people. Do not be discouraged or afraid. Great forces will come against you. But I have made you strong. I am sending you to a hard-hearted people. As you cross over, take my people with you. Do not be like your ancestors who did not cross over because of fear. They believed not because of disobedience. Speak life to my people. My words shall give life to the dying and healing to the sick. Those who are blind will see again. Bring hope to my people. I will raise them up. For I am the Lord your God." When he opened his eye, he knew the truth. This was not just a battle between men. It was a battle between good and evil, light and darkness. He turned toward the village, his steps lighter and his spirit renewed. There was much work to be done, but Berko was no longer confused or afraid. The God of his ancestors was with him, and that was more than enough. The experience reminded him of a story the old man told him of a voice coming out of a burning bush. But the bush was not consumed. Later that evening, Adana found Berko by the fire, his face calm and resolute. She sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You confronted him, didn't you?" she asked softly. Berko nodded. "Yes, he will not stop. Neither will Chief Okoro." Adana squeezed his shoulder. "And neither will we. You're not alone, Berko. The people see your heart. They will follow." Berko smiled faintly, looking into her eyes. "It's not about me, Adana. It's about the truth. The ancestors have spoken. This battle is bigger than us." Adana leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then we fight together. For Umatata. For our people." Berko told Adana about the experience he had on his way from visiting the senior father. Adana listened intently with a heart ready to obey. The fire crackled between them, its warmth a reminder of the strength they share.